All right, in this last part of Unit 5, we're going to be looking at the muscles, the names of the muscles, and then the action that each performs. So we're not going to be looking at every muscle in your body, but we are going to be looking at like the key major muscles that you would encounter. So keep in mind when we're talking about naming muscles, sometimes the way they're named sometimes has to do with their size, where they're located, the origin, like how many origins there are. So the bicep, for example, has 2 points of origin, those points of attachment. Maybe it's about a direction, if something's running at an oblique or side angle. So let's look at a couple of examples. So like triceps brachii, there are three brachii that's in the brachial area. So you got your arm area, there's 3 points of origin. So I'm not going to break this down for you. I'm not going to ask you that on a test, but I do want you to see that some of these names have meaning. So when we talk about zygomaticus, that should give you a clue. That's around the zygomatic bone. So, you by knowing some things, you already have an idea of where some of these muscles will be located. When we look at where the muscles are, they are right underneath our skin. So you have your epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. You'll have some fat in the hypodermis layer, and then you're going to have muscles. We've talked several times already about how expressive our faces are. We have fine motor control, so we use a lot of muscles all the time, but we have a lot of control of our facial muscles. So we're gonna start with naming those guys. So the facial muscles that I want you to know, there's obviously more than this, but these are like I said, some main guys. So orbicularis oculi. And so if you look at this here, the orbicularis oculi goes around the eye in a circle like this. So when it contracts, so it gets small, what's it going to do? It's going to cause your eye to close. So if you engage both of the orbicularis oculi muscles around both eyes, then you close your eyes. If you just close one, then you're winking at somebody. So anytime you blink and you're closing your eyes, you're activating the orbicularis oculi muscles. Anytime you pucker your mouth, like whether you're just making a funny face like this little guy right here, or if you are blowing somebody like an air kiss, like around across the room, you're like you blow a kiss to somebody, or you're maybe whistling, you're puckering the mouth. That's the orbicularis oris muscle, and so that's in a circle around the lips. So it's going right around the outside of your mouth. So therefore, when it contracts in, it's puckering the lips out. Now we're going to have 2 muscles for smiling. One of them is kind of like the big, genuine, big mouth kind of smile, and so that's the zygomaticus one. So if you look at where the zygomaticus muscle is, it's connecting from the edges of your, kind of connecting obviously to your mouth, but it's running up to your zygomatic bone. So that's this guy right here. So you can see 1, and there's 2. So this zygomaticus, it's to the edge of the mouth, but connecting up to the zygomatic arch up here, and so, or the zygomatic bone. And so when this guy contracts, he's going to pull your lips up, and you get this big, genuine, happy looking smile. It's going to be a little different. I'm going to skip this one for just a second. Then rhizorius. The rhizorius, he's coming straight back. So here we go. Here's the zygomaticus right here, 1, 2. And then notice rhizorius is down farther. So it's more at the edge of your mouth. And so when it contracts, it's going to pull your mouth back. So it'll be like a small grin. Maybe if you're laughing, maybe that kind of I don't want to say fake smile, but like a fake smile in a social situation. You're like, yeah. Or like you're doing that. You're smiling, but it's not like this really big, like open mouth kind of smile. So this is a much bigger smile because you're being pulled up, as opposed to the rhizorius, which is kind of more of the grin where you're pulling straight back. The buccinator, this one here, his job is to like keep your food in your mouth in essence, but it's kind of keeping your cheek to your teeth. So in other words, if you're making this face, like you do like the fish face, trying to do fish lips, that's you're engaging those buccinator muscles. And so it's right behind the mouth. So here's your orbicularis oris. The buccinators are right here at your cheeks. Whereas the procerus muscle is the ones right in between your eyes. And so if you get like frowny face and you get kind of a few wrinkles up in there, that zone there, that's the procerus muscle. So anytime you're like, what? That's when you're engaging that guy. So what other kind of muscles do we use like in our head? Well, we're going to use a couple muscles to help us chew. And so if you grit your mandible, like kind of grit your teeth, you actually can feel back here at the very back of your mandible, you can feel the masseter kind of bulge out, and you can feel like the temporalis, which is right over the temporal bone, you can feel him contract also. So you can feel both of these guys if you grit your teeth, and we use them in chewing. So every time you're closing your mouth, you're engaging these muscles here. So in terms of moving your head, so as we're kind of moving on down the body, the sternocleidomastoid, he's one of my favorites, one because he sounds so fancy, but this is the one that connects all the way from the back. So notice he's back here, and he's coming all the way to the front to the clavicle. So he's going from back to front. So I don't know if you've ever had a situation where like you were like running or jogging or doing something, but you kind of like look over your head and you feel like this big, crazy twangy pain. It's your sternocleidomastoid who's just like had some kind of crazy spasm. But if you contract both of these at the same time, now consider, here's in the back of your head, if both, and it goes to the front, so if you kind of run your hands from the back of the head, put your thumbs down your clavicle, if this guy contracts in your back of your head, you're going to be pulling your neck down. Your head's going to come down to your chest. So if both sternocleidomastoids contract, you're going to flex the head to the chest. So your head's going to come down to your chest. But what happens if you just do one of them? Well, if you just do one of them, it's going to turn your head kind of to the side. And so that's what I mean by a lateral flexion of the head. So it's kind of like a what? Like to the side this way. Or if you do the other side, it kind of goes that way. So if you do one, you kind of get a little bit of a turn when you're looking that way. If both contract, though, that is how you get your head down to your chest. The deltoid muscle we have talked about a little bit before when we talked about the deltoid tuberosity. So your deltoid muscle, it's like a shoulder cap, it's like a big shoulder cap here sitting on top of your shoulder, and it attaches to your humerus at that deltoid tuberosity. That's where the muscle is attaching, intertwines with that periosteum. So when this guy contracts, it's going to pull your arm up. So that's that abduction. So it's going up, that's deltoid action. The pectoralis major, so where's your pectoral region? The pectoral body region is right here in the chest. So major indicates that it's a bigger muscle. There is a smaller pectoralis. There's a pectoralis minor. We're not going to identify him. So pectoralis major is this big chest muscle. Notice he's attached to the sternum and the clavicle and the humerus. So when he contracts, he's going to be pulling the humerus, right? So it's a pull this way. So let me show you a video of how that's going to work. Oops, I'm sorry, I am talking. That says arm to chest flexion. I forgot to turn the video on for my recording. So what I said was pectoralis major, arm to chest flexion. Arm to chest flexion. So now you get to see it twice. So you can see how it's, when this guy contracts, he's going to pull the humerus in, and so you're getting flexion because you have a smaller angle right there. Oops, I didn't need to hit that again. So here's just a different view of pectoralis major and then the deltoid muscle. The deltoid muscle you're going to be able to see not only from the front, but you're also going to be able to see from the back. The latissimus dorsi, he is going to do the opposite. He's going to work in opposition to pectoralis major. So if pectoralis major is bringing my arm in, latissimus dorsi is moving away. So it's doing the extension. I have a bigger angle here. And where he's located on your back. So you can see him connecting to all these spinous processes, and you can see him connecting to the back side of the humerus bone. So when, so you've got, remember, pectoralis major coming in, opposite antagonistic action, latissimus dorsi going back. The trapezius muscle, his job, he's up here. There's the ones I joke about when I say like, big crazy steroidy type of bodybuilders, like they go too much on the muscles in their neck, like they don't look like they have a neck. It's because their trapezius muscle is too big. So the trapezius muscle, it's the one also that if people are giving you a little massage, you're like, yes, 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 that feels great. So they're massaging your trapezius muscle, but it's in your neck and then comes down your back, but it's attached to the scapula bone. So you can see here how he's attached to that big giant, remember the big ridge across the back of the scapula and how it becomes the acromion process. And so you can see the trapezius muscle is attached to that as well as to all these spinous processes, kind of anchored up here in your head for stability. But his job is to move the scapula around. So he can, keeps it all stable, but he can raise it. So you shrug your shoulders, you're like, up, down? Like, I don't know. So your trapezius is literally pulling this guy straight up. He can also rotate. So when you're moving your back around, you can rotate that around. So let's see. You're not going to be able to hear me. I'm just going to have to talk over myself, which is kind of weird. So it was the wrong video. I thought that was a video of me, but it was not. Right, so I thought that was a video of me, but it's not. So here we go. Let me show you the trapezius action here. So you can see how he can bring your shoulder blades back. I showed you how you could shrug, so here's showing you how to shrug also. So all of those motions are the trapezius muscle. All right, so apparently I am going to do this motion. That's latissimus dorsi is extension. And then this was the trapezius motion. So if you are playing the PowerPoint like in its original form later, this is the latissimus dorsi action. This is how you would see the trapezius. The external abdominal obliques, so guess where they are? They're outside. They're the most outside set of muscles. They are in your abdominal area, and they're going at an angle. And so you can see those are the ones here on the side. So if you were twisting back and forth, each one would be engaging one right after the other. Now it's easier to see like here, but what if you're looking, you're like, whoa, that's a lot of muscles. Like, where are you? You're these ones all the way on the outside. You're the most superficial, and you're running at an angle. So these are those external obliques out here. So let me show you a video of that trunk rotation. All right, so let's watch this guy. So he's engaging just one. So that's the one on the other side. So these guys over here are pulling him in that direction. Okay, so rectus abdominis, his job is to help you stabilize your pelvis while you're walking. But how I would ask you on a test is he's going to allow you to do a sit-up motion. So when you engage like your six-pack abs or whatever, whether they're six-pack or not, and let's be real, the only way to get six-pack abs is to be like just eating a bunch of broiled chicken and broccoli. So that's really about diet. It's not, you can do a 6 million sit-ups, but if you're not willing to just eat plain broccoli and asparagus all the time, then it's going to be pretty difficult to get. So I have decided not worth it. But if these muscles here, and once you contract them, they are going to cause your body to go into their trunk, to go into that flex position. So this person down here, they are engaging those rectus abdominal muscles, and it's causing them to be able to perform that sit-up motion. The serratus anterior muscles you actually use all the time and don't realize that you're using them. Sometimes students have a hard time recognizing them in a diagram because they're not like this, they're really exposed, but when you see them with all of the muscles, there are these ones way up high, kind of underneath the armpit, running at an angle. So these are the external obliques here, causing you to rotate back and forth one at a time. But these guys up here, even though they're running at that same angle, these ones are separate. These are these guys. So you're seeing just a little peak of this right in here. So the serratus anterior muscles, they are attached to your scapula, and they are causing you to be able to push forward. So they're going to pull your scapula in a forward direction. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so here we go. Let's watch these guys over here. So this is serratus anterior. Notice how it's pulling your scapula towards the front of your body. So what that's going to do is allow you, you can see over this person up here, as the serratus anterior muscles contract, it's going to pull the scapula forward, and therefore you're able to push off. So if you're opening a door, obviously there's other muscles involved, but it's allowing you to do this push-up motion. All of those things are happening because of the serratus anterior, aka the boxer muscles. So your external and internal intercostal muscles, these are all about breathing. So you can imagine we'll be coming back to these in a future unit when we talk about the respiratory system. So the external just means they are the most on the outside. So you can see here are your ribs. External are on the outside, internal are right underneath that. And so not only is there a difference in terms of layers, there's also a difference in terms of location. The external intercostals are more towards the back, whereas the internal intercostals are more towards the front. And so ultimately, I would not ask you to identify exactly on a diagram who's external, who's internal intercostals, but I do want you to know and be able to associate these muscles with breathing, because it's obviously going to be important in our respiratory system unit. When these guys in the back contract, that's going to pull the rib cage open, And when these guys contract in the front, that's going to close the rib cage back down. So when you breathe, your rib cage opens a little bit, closes a little bit, and that's the alternating action of open it up, close it down in terms of breathing. So let me show you a quick little picture of that. So you're going to be able to see external and internal intercostals. So that's going to obviously go back and forth one cycle after another cycle. And we're moving on down to the arm. We've talked about the biceps and triceps multiple times. So your biceps obviously has 2 points of origin in the arm region, but your biceps is in the front of your arm, upper arm. Triceps is in the back. When the bicep contracts, it's going to cause that lower arm to flex up, and the tricep, when it contracts, is going to extend your lower arm back down. So you can see here's biceps in the front. This is where the anchor point is. The point of origin is up here. The insertion, where movement is going to result, is down here. So as this muscle gets shorter, it pulls together, this lower part, this tendon on the radius is going to pull up into the flex motion, whereas the triceps, he's in relax mode when that happens. They're antagonistic to each other. This guy, when he contracts, notice his tendon anchored to the ulna, he's going to pull the ulna back down. So biceps is pulling the radius up, triceps is pulling the ulna down for that alternating flexion versus extension. Just as an FYI, your whole lower hand, like in hands and fingers and arm, there's lots of flexors and extensors. We aren't learning all of these guys, but I do want you to, you're like, oh, look, extensor, 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 extensor. There's lots of extensors. In other words, if you take your hand, anything in your hand, I'm trying to get myself in a little video here, that's causing you to flex, all of those muscles are your flexors. In doing this, all of those muscles are the extensors. So you have fingers, you have flexors, you have extensors. So there are all of those different muscles. We aren't learning all of those different guys, but I do want you to know that they are there. Like, we're down in the leg. Whoop, whoop. So when you get to the leg, you've got your gluteus maximus. Yes, we know where that guy is. He's your big butt muscle. Not to imply you have a big butt muscle, but it is a large muscle is what I was trying to say. So when you're looking at this guy, sometimes students have a hard time with this image. You're like, what am I looking at? Well, this is the butt muscle. This is the gluteus maximus. Which leg is it? Well, you have to finish the butt, so to speak. So if this is one cheek, then the other one's going to be over here, right? So this is the right leg looking at the back of the right leg. You know, it's the back because of the butt muscle. Which leg is it? Well, follow the curve. So then the other one would be here. So this is right, and left leg would be over here. So when you look at the gluteus maximus, his big job is to extend the thigh or the leg. So that means your leg is going to be going back. So you have to increase that angle. So let's look at that motion. Okay, so here's the gluteus maximus, and you can see as he pulls, you're getting extension. This is that big extension right there. So I might take him back just a second one more time because I want to see that again. So here's extension, bringing your leg back. That is what I mean by major thigh or leg extender. Now there is also, underneath the gluteus maximus, another muscle called the gluteus medius. There's even another one, but we're not going to learn that guy. So you'll be able to differentiate location because medius is always like peeking up behind gluteus maximus, like, hello, I'm back here. And so not only is he involved in steadying your pelvis, there's lots of muscles that help do that. He's going to help us walk, but he can also abduct our leg, and he could rotate the leg in a medial way. So he can do both. So remember, abduction is going away, going out. So he's going to take the legs out. So you can imagine here he is attached to the outside of the femur here onto this big trochanter and the greater trochanter, and he's going to like swing the femur out this way for abduction motion. He can also, based on where he is, he can turn your whole thigh in a medial direction. So let me show you this video, and so we'll be able to at least see the abduction motion. Okay, so here we go. So there's the abduction motion right there. So easier to see like how that works when he's attached to this greater trochanter. When it contracts, he's pulling that femur out. So for rotating the thigh medially, I'm going to use my arm because I can't get my leg into the camera here. So imagine my arm was my leg. So rotate medially means rotate and turn towards the inside, towards the middle of the body. So your whole leg can rotate in towards the middle of your body. The gracilis does the opposite motion. So if we are abducting going away, now thanks to gluteus medius, the gracilis is going to help bring our leg back in. So he's this really thin, skinny guy running along the inside. So if you ever see any of these, like people will make fun of like the Thigh Master, like from eons upon eons ago, where are those machines at the gym where you like squeeze your legs in together, and then because you start at like kind of a V position and then you squeeze your legs in. That's your gracilis muscle. And so that's this guy right here. So when he contracts, he's going to bring those legs back. So let me show you a little video for that. Okay, so here we go. Get all these little videos because you don't get to see me standing in class and doing them for you. So here's your gracilis, is this most inside guy, but he brings the leg back in. So and here's one more time. All right, so now we're going to look at the quadricep muscle. There are, based on its name, there are 4 different muscles, and we'll look at the names of those muscles in a second. Their job is to extend the lower leg, so you're sitting at a 90-degree angle, and you're going to bring your leg up straight, or it will flex the whole leg. So I'm going to show you here, it flexing the whole leg. So this is quadricep muscles. That's flexion of the leg. And so if you were extending the lower leg, that would be if my leg here was at that 90 degree and I needed to bring my lower leg out so that it was straight. So that would also be your quadricep muscle, because that muscle here is attached to your, these muscles are attached to your tibial tuberosity, and then that's going to bring that lower leg up. So when we look at the quadricep muscles, there are 4, like I said, but one of them we're not going to ever label. These 3 you will need to be able to label, but this one you can't see it, so I'm not going to make you label it. So when you look at how to label them, for the quadricep, I've got rectus femoris is running straight down the middle, so right along the front of the femur. So that's how I remember he's on the front, and front as a word has an R in it. That's rectus, R for the second letter in front of the femur. The vastus one, so notice lateralis versus medialis. So look at the leg. Which one is the most lateral? Which one is the most medial? So your vastus lateralis is towards the outside, whereas your vastus medialis is the one closest to the middle of the body. So remember, here's one leg, middle of the body, other leg. So this is medialis. Rectus femoris is the front. That's R for in front of the femur. Lateralis is on the most lateral side, medialis the most medial side. And when you look at the tendon from all 3 of these guys, they all merge together. These tendons anchor to the patella bone. And then from the patella, there is a ligament that attaches the patella to the tibial tuberosity. That's this guy here. He is actually, it's hard to see that this says, sometimes they'll call it a patellar tendon, but it's technically a ligament because it's attaching a bone to a bone. But when the quadricep muscle contracts, it's obviously going to pull on the patella, and by default, pull, because of this ligament, on the tibial tuberosity, which is what causes that lower leg extension. Your hamstring muscles, they are the antagonistic group to the quadricep muscles, and they are on the backside of your thigh. There are 3 of them, and they do the exact opposite motion of the quadricep. So they are going to flex your lower leg, in other words, bring this leg from this position into a 90 degree, or they're going to extend the entire leg. They're going to bring my whole leg back. So those are my hamstring muscles. And so those were both extension motions, just how far did you go? So I started at, let me go backwards. I started here, I'm going to extend and then extend again, but both of those are being done by the hamstring muscle. So hamstrings, extension, extension. So looking at the 3 muscles of the hamstrings, we have biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. So I know the hard part with this is you're like, oh, in the front, it's the rectus femoris. That's why I brought up that R for rectus. R is part of the word front. Biceps femoris, B for back of the leg. So back of the femur is how I remember biceps femoris. So he is this big guy right here, running along the back of the femur. And then these 2, the semi guys, I have tendinosis and membranosus, I think of T for on top. Tendinosis is on top of membranosus. So when you look at these colors over here, this guy's blue, this guy over here is green. So if you have red-green color blindness, I apologize that he is red. This blue guy is sitting on top of the green guy. So imagine, let me just grab some random piece of paper here with my little notes and stuff, but here's a little piece of paper. If this was membranosus and I put my arm on top of the paper, my arm is tendinosis, it's on top. Notice how you can see parts of the paper on both sides of my arm. So that's what you're looking at here. You can see membranosus is underneath, he's the green guy, with the tendinosis laying on top. So how, when you see this in a diagram, I will always have membranosus with two lines pointing it out. So like, see, the membranosus is here, but this is also membranosus over here, so that you can tell that the tendinosis is on top. The gastrocnemius muscle, so now we're in the lower leg. So when we talk about the lower leg, we're going to have antagonistic action as well. So gastrocnemius, he is your big calf muscle. So if you ever see people who are like the super runners or super bikers and they got those like crazy calves in the back, it's like those choom choom, you're like, whoa, you're a serious exercise person. That's the gastrocnemius muscle. And so you can see there's a really long tendon that attaches to the calcaneus bone. And so this tendon is called the calcaneal tendon, or sometimes also called the Achilles tendon. So if you've been reading any kind of literature and you hear like Achilles heel, that's what they're talking about. Because if you damage or cut this tendon, then you cannot make your foot do plantar flexion, which is a major motion in walking. So, getting your foot to do that. So that's the gastrocnemius muscle. The soleus is right underneath the gastrocnemius muscle. So he's this little flat guy. So you can barely see, it looks like he's this little teeny tiny pancake guy back here. So big bulgy gastrocnemius. And you can see the gastrocnemius in diagrams from the front also. It'd be like in the lower leg, this like bulge kind of coming off from the side. But you can see how the calcaneal tendon is right on top of the soleus. You can see the soleus peeking out on both sides. They work together. The soleus tendon is also attached to the calcaneus bone. So both those muscles tendons are like fused together, anchored to the calcaneus bone to allow for plantar flexion. Remember, pointy toe, right? Tibialis anterior works in antagonistic action to the gastrocnemius and soleus. And so this muscle does the opposite. It runs along the front of the tibia bone. So that's why he's anterior to the tibia. And so he's going to anchor to your foot and he is going to pull that foot back. So that's how you get that dorsiflexion. So I'm going to show you a video where it shows that opposing action right here. Gastrocnemius muscle, plantar flexion, tibialis anterior, dorsiflexion. All right, so keep in mind the gastrocnemius and soleus work together to do that plantar flexion. So now that we're done with muscles, you're like, phew, those are the muscles and the muscle actions. We're going to talk just about a few conditions with the muscular system that are specific to the muscular system. So botulism is when there's a bacteria. Yes, I am at school and the bell just rang. So is a bacteria that there's a certain strain of bacteria that can produce this toxin, and it's going to interfere with the release of acetylcholine. Just hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. So here you can imagine, here's our motor neuron. Remember, he releases acetylcholine, binds to a receptor in the muscle cell, which then initiates a new action potential and depolarization in the muscle cell, so it leads to contraction. If you cannot release acetylcholine at all, then there's no message going to the muscle cell, and as a result, it doesn't contract. So where the real issue with botulism occurs is that it causes the muscle cells of your lungs to not contract. And so because they don't contract, you end up not being able to breathe. And so that's what you actually die from. And so in days gone by, when people did a lot of canning themselves, which I don't understand why it's called canning because they're in jars, but when people canned food themselves, if they didn't do it properly, then that bacteria could end up in the jar itself, eating all this yummy food, and then someone would eat that food later, like in the winter, and then they would die. And so how to make sure you avoid that, if you're like, we can, oh my God, like, what do I need to do? Make sure you boil it long enough. So it has to be boiling water for a certain amount of time before you put the lid on and seal it to make sure all the bacteria are dead. It's interesting enough that today we actually take advantage of the botulism toxin, is that we doctors or researchers found like, well, what if we took that toxin and just injected it into very specific muscles, and then those muscles would not be able to contract, right? Because the motor neuron wouldn't be able to release acetylcholine. And so that in this muscle here, the frontalis muscle, you can see that's been injected. And so now she doesn't have wrinkles there. And I've actually seen commercials for certain types of Botox injections, maybe even to help with migraines, but I'm not clear how that works. Myasthenia gravis is when your body's immune system is going awry. So there's several conditions that pop up that are autoimmune conditions. So we talked, multiple sclerosis was an autoimmune condition. This is another autoimmune condition when there's a particular immune system cell that thinks part of you is a foreign invader and a germ and attacks it. So in this case, your immune system is producing an antibody, so a protein, a little warrior, and it's going to sit on the receptors. So in other words, in this case, your motor neuron releases the acetylcholine, but they can't get to the receptor to cause this muscle to contract. And so as a result, you aren't able to contract all of your skeletal muscle cells, and that's why you end up with weaker skeletal muscle cells. Muscle atrophy happens when you aren't able to use the muscle. So if somebody is on bed rest, for example, or they have some kind of condition where like maybe they were paralyzed and the nerves aren't functioning to send messages down to those muscle cells. But if the muscle cells aren't used, then they degenerate and they get smaller. And so in this case, you can see this person here is not able to use, they're not getting messages to these muscle cells. Muscle cells aren't being used. So you can see they are much smaller than the left leg itself. So ultimately, this is why steroids were developed. If somebody was on bed rest for a particular period of time, or they were having some kind of a medical issue, but there was hope, like, okay, we're going to get them back on their feet, and we need to make sure they maintain the muscle mass. So they came up with steroids as a way to treat that and to help build muscle mass. Obviously, people have abused that. Muscular dystrophy is when you have, it's not just one disease, it's a whole bunch of different diseases, and it's an inherited condition. So notice there's an abnormal gene that is inherited. It's on the X chromosomes, which makes it more likely for men to inherit the condition than women, because women have 2 copies of the X for their sex chromosomes, and men are XY, so they only get 1 copy. But if you inherit this mutation, what ends up happening is there's more proteins involved in muscle cells than we've talked about. We've talked about actin, we've talked about myosin, and so you can see, oh, here's actin, here's the cell membrane, here's the sarcolemma. But you're like, whoa, there's a lot of other stuff going on in there that we did not talk about. But you can see as like those sarcomeres aren't just floating in space in there, there's going to be proteins anchoring them down. And so this dystrophin protein, if he is not produced properly or made properly, therefore this whole structure, that whole sarcomere structure, is not as stable, and therefore you end up with muscles that don't work well. So it's a progressive weakness and loss of muscle because you don't have this like stabilizing structure inside. And so this is just showing you why it's easier to pass on for men or to end up with the condition versus women, because they only have the 1 X. So if they get the mutated version, they're going to have the condition, whereas girls have a backup copy. And as long as you have 1 functioning gene, you make enough functioning protein to be okay. And last but not least is a spasm. Lots of people have had muscle cramps. And there's not just one reason, like you're like, oh, my muscle's cramping. There could be you're using it too much, you don't have enough water, could be you don't have the right ion balance in your muscle cells, you don't have enough blood running to those muscles. So there's lots of different reasons that you can end up with a cramp. So depending on what it is, it's going to be, make sure, obviously you're going to stop, gently stretch it, make sure have you been drinking enough water. You're like, I've been drinking enough water, but it's a really hot day and you're sweating a lot. Then make sure you get liquid with ions in it, the electrolytes. So look at the little nutrition label. You can't just go, hey, Gatorade. Gatorade used to be a drink with lots of electrolytes in it, but they have added a lot more sugar at this point and removed some. So you have to look, does it have sodium and potassium and magnesiums and calciums? Like what's in there to make sure that you're replenishing that. If you've been drinking, but that's only if you're like super crazy sweating, not necessarily before. You want to make sure you got enough water. If you're doing that 100-mile bike ride, then yeah, you better get some electrolytes. You also can massage it a little bit. All right. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out. Have a good day, guys.